It's medieval combat video review time. This time we're going to be looking at some practice or training footage from the SCA between Sir Fearghus on the right and Queen Helga on the left. This one is by request of Queen Helga. If anyone else has any combat footage they'd like to request that I review or as a group we give a shot, more than happy to do so. Just, get in touch with me, either leave a comment here or reach out in some other fashion, and I'll review your combat footage. I won't necessarily know what I'm talking about, but I'll give it a shot. So, again, this is going to be 3 passes, SCA combat. What that means is that it's full speed, full power, and it takes a single good blow to the body or head to end the fight. A good blow to the arm or leg will disable the use of those legs, and you're invulnerable from the knee down and the wrist up. So hands, feet, shins, knees, those aren't targets. And it's done with rattan weapons. So right off the bat, looking at this combat, we can see a mix of styles. We got 2 right-handers. Sir Fearghus is a little taller. Looks like he's also using a slightly longer sword. Both those swords can stab in his hands. And he's fighting with a sword in his left hand. Some people in the SCA like to call this Madu style. In my opinion, it looks like he's holding a sword, so I'm going to call it 2 swords. He's also holding it by what's called the ricasso of the sword. That's often a blunted part of the blade regardless, but he's recreating fighting as if he had a chain gauntlet on, so regardless, he'd be able to grab his own blade. So what that is largely a defensive weapon, but you could stab with it. You wouldn't be able to hit very hard with the edges of it held in that position. So it's pretty much stabbing only with the bottom point of that sword. So you can see sort of holding it upside down as a typical cruciform sword. So there's the sword with the handle, right? Queen Helga is using a small center grip teardrop shield. Let's take a quick look at their first couple passes. So both right-handers, very quickly, Queen Helga lands a rap to the leg. That's a strike with the back edge of the sword, dropping Sir Fearghus to his knees. They continue to fight. Sir Fearghus counters with another leg shot, and now it's on the ground. Attempted stab with that left-handed sword, and Queen Helga lands a good thrust with her sword. So if we go back and take a look at those passes in slow motion, I'll make some initial comments, and then we can break down the mechanics. Alright, so let's go through in slow motion. So here they're sitting up at range. Right off the bat, they're both threatening a thrust. From where their sword tips are, it doesn't look like there's much of an edge threat. Both of those style matchups are good for the thrust. The reason I say that is when you're holding 2 swords and you've got a thrusting point down in one of those swords, you've got an excellent opportunity to stab the leg, stab the right side of your opponent's body, stab the face. You can stab with both swords simultaneously, which is difficult to defend. And then Queen Helga's got a good opportunity to stab as well, because that narrow sword doesn't provide Sir Fearghus much defense against the stab. So both of those, that style matchup, as soon as you got someone fighting with a sword and offhand spear, sword and offhand sword like that, both people open up to the thrust quite a lot. However, they both defend the thrust pretty easily, and we see Queen Helga land a leg wrap. We're going to see that shot a bunch. It looks like, in these passes, it looks like one of her most devastating blows. I should also point out I've only fought Queen Helga a handful of times. I've never fought Sir Fearghus, so I'm guessing a little bit at what might be typical style here. And it also, if I were to guess, I would say Sir Fearghus doesn't fight with this as his primary weapon style, but that's just a guess. So apologies if I make any poor assumptions. Continue in slow motion through the fight, and then we'll do a little bit of detailed breakdown. So what's happened here is Helga's backed off, give a little space. Sir Fearghus wants to keep the range short, and he throws a pretty quick opening onside shot to the leg, dropping Helga. The fight continues. In this case, now he's trying to get under that shield to land a body shot. Helga just below the belt on that wrap, so it doesn't quite kill, and comes in with a sneaky thrust. Okay, so let's go back to the beginning of the fight, and we'll go through. So at this range, again, they're both setting up for thrust pretty well. There is a possibility to throw a thrust that's converted to a leg shot, that sort of thing, but that's a follow-up blow. Now, the other thing is they're both favoring a right foot forward stance more often. They're both pretty fluid in terms of their footwork, but being right foot forward diminishes your defense a little bit, gives you a little bit of extra range, though. The other thing I'll point out, sorry, I take a little sip of coffee here. The other thing I'll point out is that they're both pretty stable fighters. You don't see either of them leaning very far off balance. Their weight is generally distributed between their feet. Their footwork is deliberate. You don't see a whole lot of body lean. Very little head movement, particularly from Queen Helga here. So both very stable, very planted fighters. Now you can see Sir Fearghus is now committed to a forward attack, and as soon as he commits, there's a risk to that commitment, and I think Queen Helga recognizes that. So you'll notice the tip of this blade comes forward a little bit, and even though this back leg here is quite a ways away, it's going to be moving into range because you can see Sir Fearghus's body is leaned forward. He's propelling off that back foot, so he's going to be moving forward. And I'm going to do this sort of frame by frame. As he moves forward, he throws an onside headshot. Helga blocks that, and now you see his left leg is much closer. He's still committed forward. That left-hand sword is forward, and Helga's now chambered to throw the wrap. Bam. And that lands right on the leg. It's a little bit of blurry footage. It looks to me like it's probably an on-edge shot. If you hit with the flat of the blade, it doesn't count. But because the rotation of the sword is this way, it's not really whether the blade is perpendicular to the leg, it's whether the blade is perpendicular to the motion of the sword at the moment of impact. So that looks like it's on edge to me. And he acknowledges that blow and immediately drops. He's still on the attack. There's no hold called. And it looks like he throws, it's a little hard to tell from the angle, but he throws a shot into Helga's left leg there. But it's not hard, or it's not good. It's kind of hard to tell from here. And the reason for that, I think, if we go back here, see Helga's position with her shield is pretty good. You can see its point is pretty much straight up and down. As we go in here, it's a little tough to tell, but it looks like that point gets pushed out of position. Now, it could be because she's using really heavy body mechanics to get that wrap in, or it could be that Fearghus is messing with it. It's a little tough to tell. But in this space here, there's probably some interference going on with the shield, and that's totally fine, right? Helga's not hitting him with the shield, but I imagine there's something here pushing her shield out of the way, making it so now you look at the shield position, whereas before it was like this. Now the tip of that shield's pointed all the way out here, leaving that leg vulnerable. Regardless, perhaps because he's been hit, he's not able to get enough power on that leg shot, and the fight continues. Now, at this point, he's mostly probably throwing to keep her at bay. You're vulnerable when you drop to your knees, so he's probably keeping the flurry up so that she has to deal with it. It seems to me at this moment Sir Fearghus has a good opportunity, if he's really skilled with that left hand, to thrust right there. So around the edge of that shield, there's a little spot of thigh sticking out. There's a lot of material on those pants and on that tunic that can slip on itself, making it difficult for a thrust to land. But if Sir Fearghus takes the tip of his left-handed sword and stabs her right in the thigh here, you can see that the angle of her leg is kind of perpendicular to the thrust. So it would stick really well, and she'd have to crank that shield edge over pretty far to the left to block it, right? So that to me seems like a big opening with that left hand. And, you know, having that short sword in the left hand is a bit of a weakness for leg protection. But once you've dropped to your knees, it's now actually more effective than if it was like, say, a long left-hand spear. When fighting from your knees is pretty tough to get a stab. Here's a place where I think he could be taking advantage of the shorter weapon. But it looks like he's leaving it in place for defense. Now, the other thing is, if he were to throw that, you might think him vulnerable, but his onside shot here with his own sword is tying up her blade. If he stabs at this moment and recovers his basket hilt to protect his face, it looks like he might get a free stab on the leg, even if she were to counter. Regardless, they set up. Here's another thing that I see him doing. I've got, you know, everyone's got different opinions on this. If you look at his style of movement on his knees, it's very well balanced, it's very centered, it's sort of shuffling. I prefer a slightly different style of knee movement if you are going to close distance while on your knees. So you can see he's actually advancing on her. Now, it's very stable. At no point is he really coming open or anything like that, and he's able to get that. He's able to shrug that thrust off by popping it with that offhand sword, so the thrust misses. So it worked out totally fine for him. So I feel a little unstable shuffling on my knees like that, like I could fall forward. I tend to rock my hips a little bit, so it'll be left hip forward, right hip forward. There's a different style of knee movement, and it's an SCA peculiarity to fight from your knees in the first place. So Not really, in my opinion, something I want to train too much. But I should probably ask, if I ever meet Sir Fearghus, I'll ask him how he does that without feeling like he's overbalanced forward a little bit. So here, this is the second time in this fight we see Queen Helga start with a thrust. Again, good movement. He's able to defend and defeat that thrust pretty quickly. And now we get into a flurry. So one thing I think here that we'll see really quickly, I think Helga's feeling vulnerable to the headshot right here. Right? Sir Fearghus has a blade relatively chambered here. It's not got a lot of power, and it would have to travel up a bit, but I think she's feeling that the head is exposed, and this ultimately leads to her getting hit. So if you look at the height of the shield here, as we go forward a few frames, you see that shield goes way up, right, and does make the head block, but he doesn't actually do a snap. He's going a straight down shot, right? She throws that same wrap that she threw at the leg earlier. He defends that pretty easily with the sword. If it had been a little higher, now she can't see this, if it had been a little higher and she was willing to intentionally target the arm, which is a legal target, some people choose not to do it, she'd be able to hit him in that arm really easily because he hasn't rolled that left-hand sword out. I'm going to get that line off the screen, but just keep in mind that's like her typical shield guard, right? So, we even missed the leg shot in that. Sorry, here's the leg shot. Oh, yeah, okay, stupid. I apologize. Take back what I said about her shield position. He actually lands the leg shot. Here, we don't... It's right there. I didn't quite see it in this particular slow-mo pass. So the reason she raises her shield is to protect her head. Her legs are taken anyway. I was wondering why. Okay, so her legs are taken by that shot. It looks like he throws the wrap and it gets under the shield. So now she's throwing a blow to keep him busy while she drops. Okay, that makes more sense. Okay, now what she's done is rock that shield over to her right. I think that's really good to defend against that thrust. You see how the sword is actually really poised to stab in the armpit or the body. Good defense. Now, as she uncorks, it feels to me this would be an opportunity for Sir Fearghus to stab her in the belly. I think he's a little concerned because you see that blade is, the handle of his blade is also his head protection. If after getting hit there, he's able to stab straight down instead of have the sword bobble back, there's an opportunity. He goes for the deep offside. There's another opportunity potentially to stab in the stomach there. And now he's chasing down, right? So if we go back a little bit, you see Helga throws that wrap that's a really big threat again. And he's got to follow the thread of the wrap down to protect his back. Gets the blade back to protect. And now they're belly to belly. This is a tough position for Helga. Sir Fearghus' sword is much more fluid and able to move in a position like this where her shield actually becomes a bit of a detriment. So this is a place where she can get the shield over, and it's a good thing it's not a super large shield, but she's sort of double blocking with the sword and the shield there. And at this point, if I'm Sir Fearghus, I want to go deep into my shots. I want to start getting around behind her, personally. But he's got his, you can see he's left this blade forward a little bit, so he's maintaining contact, kind of playing sticky hand with her, I think, so he knows where her sword is at. And yeah, you can see him sort of trying to maintain contact on her weapon, sort of messing up her ability to move the weapon well. So she's recovered back to get a bit of her defense back. Now here, as soon as I see this motion, you see the tip of the sword drop, and then you see the head lean this way, offside. So this tip drops back, tips the head, he's definitely throwing the offside. I see that a lot, especially with left-handers. They tip the head out of the way, and they create a little bit of a pendulum whip with the tip of the sword. So that means an offside's coming a mile away. I think there's an opportunity there. I'm not necessarily great at taking advantage of it, but if you can jam that with the shield, you get a free shot along the same line of attack. So when you see about here, you can pump that shield forward into the hand to blow that shot off, and then throw along the same line with your sword. I guess I've been told I use sound effects when drawing on the screen. But you know his defense won't be there because he's trying to throw through the same space. I'm not great at it. It's something I'm trying to work on taking advantage of when I know my opponent is throwing that offside. But it seems like an opportunity, even if not one I can take. Here comes that wrap again, and it hits just on the belt. So it needs to be above the waist to count as a kill. there's finally we see the attempted thrust at the body, and Queen Helga's response is to lean back, which gets her just out of the angle. And the reason for that, in my opinion, is that it's rotating around the elbow, so it's doing this. If instead it was a straightforward attack and went like that, even when she leans out, it would still drive into the body, right? So the reason it skips when she leans back is because it's a rotational shot. All right, this is a beautiful block right here. Block to attack. So Helga's blocking the onside shot that she can read coming with the sword blade. And as soon as the contact's made, even before the contact's made, she's timing it and saying, I'm still going to get the block. Maybe she's picking it up with a shield, and she's thrown right away. So I think that's really well timed. Again, we see another attempt at a stab with the bottom of the sword, but just a little bit too far away at that angle. To get the sort of reach you would need with a sword that size, you would need to open the wrist up. So you can see here, you know, it's close to 90 degrees, right? I think to get that attack to land true, you would need to be at an angle like that, right? So tip that sword point forward when making that stab. That would, however, and I think Sir Fearghus probably knows this, she's already thrown a bunch of wraps into that spot. When that tip comes forward, that does leave you vulnerable in this area, right? And then at this point, the sword's bobbled back. Now we get sneaky. There's this opening over here on the left side of Sir Fearghus. He's sort of guarding himself with that sword, knowing there could be that offside sword shot threat. There's the offside threat, only instead of an offside shot, it's a stab. Right? So here, if we go back, it looks like she's pumping that sword forward to hit him in the right side of the head, but instead, she goes right between the two swords and stabs in the throat. Beautiful shot. All right, so fair bit of time on that first pass. Let's take a look at the second pass. And again, these are friendly fights, right? They're doing these fights for the purposes of training and practice, so, you know, everyone's pretty friendly about it. Set up at the same range, similar setup. He's not threatening the stab with the left-hand sword because it's too short to do that from that sort of range. There's the thrust to open again, but he defeats it with the tip of his own sword. He attempts a nice step-in thrust to the face. So this set of passes, pretty close. And if we go back, I'm actually going to do this one more time at high speed. You can also see this isn't a real high-intensity fight. It's not a lazy fight, but neither of them are really amped, right? I mean, we can lose track of that when watching things in slow motion. All right, so if we go back again and just go through this sort of play-by-play, set up at the same range, both fairly balanced. Here we can see Sir Fearghus is closing, right? He's committed forward motion, but he's not way over-committed. See how balanced he is as he steps in? So it's a crossover step, and he's waited to throw the shot. He's moved his whole step, and he still hasn't thrown the shot, so he's waiting for the right opening, right? Going a little off time, and now up comes that blade, and he makes for the stab to the face. Helga gets the shield in the way, which defends against that, but I think Fearghus is sort of counting on that. So here's something really smart that Queen Helga's done. She knows that that shield is going to be bobbled, and look where she's put her sword. It's hanging over that side of her body because she knows his sword's a threat. Not going to be able to move the shield back in time to defend up here. So she's double defending by crossing her arms over her chest, which is why she doesn't, you know, die here. It also means she can't throw into that leg like last time because she's got that hanging defense. Or at least if she does throw into that leg, it's going to take a minute to get the blade over there. Right, so he sees that she's well defended, holds off, is looking for an opening. She throws a counter shot. It gets tangled up. I'm going to zoom out a little bit so we get a little better resolution. And she throws that leg wrap again. Right, really good shot. He gets the tip of the sword down to protect against it. Now, it's a really effective shot. I don't know that I can throw it as effectively as Her Majesty. If we look at this, it's a little dark, but the one thing maybe that could be done to race the tip of his sword down is to scoop under the tip of the sword and back up a little bit more. So it doesn't matter whether he gets the blade down. If she can get under the tip and then back up, if he leaves a bit of a gap between his leg and his sword, that might be the only way that lands, because he's really good at chasing that down. All right? Then comes his shot into the leg. And again, it's a difficult angle to see what's going on. It looks like maybe it hits her low because she's stepping up. Not quite sure. Now, this is one of the if we take a look at Queen Helga's footwork, I'm going to move this forward frame by frame. She takes that step back with her left foot and immediately pushes off that left foot. And I really like that as a move. It's a good change-up because people don't expect you to take that step back and immediately start driving forward. Now, in this case, she's continuing the forward motion, but a lot of people, as soon as they take that step forward, they're throwing, much like Sir Fearghus. She's waiting for an opening instead of opening herself up. So she's on the offense, but the sword hasn't moved out of position yet. She's looking for something. He thrusts to keep her at bay. Nice shield block. And then the only... this is his defense here I used to see from Sir Hathawolf all the time. Catch it on the left side of the handle of your sword, or the left side of your top of your spear, and in the gauntlet, so that you don't have to push that weapon out too far to block with that left-hand sword, but it stops it from hitting you in the face or helm. And here we see, the one thing though is he's allowed her a really good recovery. So from this position she gets a good bounce, flips it over, and throws into the leg. And he throws, it's hard to tell, it looks like it hits her shield or just above the shield. Really hard to tell with this video. And he takes the blow. So I've watched this one a couple times. I'm a little confused as to what the killing blow is. But I think it's that shot. I'm not 100% sure. Like maybe he didn't quite block it. He continues his motion. Let's go back and listen to it. Because this is one that is inches and degrees. I might have gone back too far. Okay, I think she took the shot, because you hear her say, yeah. So the shot that she takes, I think, is that one that I said is maybe shield, maybe head. All right, let's get ready for the last pass here. Well, this is a pretty good one. All right, we get the similar setup, right? They're starting at a similar range. In this case, she's threatening less of a stab. It's still definitely point forward, so it looks like a thrust, but she could be throwing an onside leg. He's definitely set up for the stab here, or the feint. Yep, open with a stab. Here's where things get interesting to me. That could have been a good killing blow if a little bit harder. We're going to talk about that. Another stab as he closes. So she's doing a really good job of saying, like, when you step in, you're going to get stabbed. And he has to defend against that. That's the first head wrap attempt we see from Her Majesty. Another stab as he steps in. Trading leg blows. Now he's using the tip of his sword again. They get in tight. And there's that wrap again. Okay, so let's take a quick look at that one, and we'll talk a little bit about my read on the psychology of this a little bit, too. Again, just my read, who knows. So we go back. Here's the start of their fight. Moving forward again. Alright, so we're just going to roll this forward in slow motion. Okay, his thrust doesn't quite land. She gets a nice moulinet. Now here, they go what I've heard called core-a-core, or core-a-core. You might call it chest-to-chest fighting. And this is one of the places where SCA combat's a little weird. You can't do leg sweeps, you can't do trips, you can't knee each other. And technically, you're not allowed to intentionally touch each other's bodies. And in this case, Helga's got the extra disadvantage. She's not allowed to intentionally touch her opponent with her shield. Now, if it's accidental, it's accidental. And if it's your weapon against them, that's totally fine. But here you can see there's a bunch of incidental contact. But they're both really vulnerable in this position. The first one to stop pushing forward, to break the clinch, is in danger to the wrap, is in danger to all sorts of shots. So neither of them want to give up. Now the other thing here is, I get into this position, it's not my favorite place to fight, but I welcome it. And when my opponent steps in on me, I want to step in on them. Psychologically, that's because I don't want them to know how uncomfortable I am fighting at that range. I have difficulty throwing shots when I've got very little room to move my sword and that sort of thing. You know, I tend to be a little bit medium to long range fighter, but I welcome the I try to look like I welcome the ultra close range. So here's, and also you can't see much when you're in a clinch like this. So we go back. How do we get into this clinch? Oh, I'm sorry, going forward. When we go back, they step forward. She makes another thrust attempt. That one's sort of really just a setup for a follow-up shot. Okay, so we're going to move forward. Forward, right? So they both step in without really throwing too much of a blow at each other and immediately cross up into this high guard. Now, I think what he's trying to do is get the stab against her chest, but it doesn't look like it's getting in there. So he moves out to sort of guard against her hand, and it's a little confusing for me, but it looks like he's using this sort of handle to sort of keep her sword arm busy, right? And that sort of nullifies her attack if he can manage it. Now she's using her shield to basically shut down his offense because it's right in his arm, right? So now they're not pushing hard on each other, but they definitely, neither of them want to give ground, and they're both using really solid footwork. Now in this case, as we move, it looks as though they're using a little bit of body lean, but they're not getting out of position. So for instance, we go here, Her Majesty's spine is a little bit forward, but not a whole lot. In some positions, you'll see people, like, they'll, in that range, lean back at that angle to create space for their sword and stuff like that. You might end up getting pushed down in that sort of position here. So that's not what we're seeing. Right? Now, oftentimes after 5 seconds, there's the opening, right? So he attempts the thrust. Why doesn't this thrust land? So he's tied up, gets the sword back, and jab. But if you look, there's not a lot of English on that thrust, right? So what people want for a thrust is something that feels like for sure it would punch through chain armor. And that stab, although clean, isn't hard, right? And that's probably because he has to have his weight centered on his feet. He's resisting the push from Helga. If he were to roll his hip back and then forward to make, to drive with that left arm, he might be off balance. So there's an opportunity for the thrust there, but I think if he were to stab really hard, it would leave him vulnerable, so that's probably why it doesn't stab super hard, right? It's almost sort of placed there, and there's definitely a push, but I've noticed also people don't like a thrust that's a push. They want to feel it go pow and pop into them, so it feels like being struck with the edge of a weapon. It doesn't matter if you put the tip on them and lean really hard, it doesn't feel like the kind of blow people are used to acknowledging. Right, so now they both back out, throw at each other, and here we go into the second pass. Again, the thrust when he steps in, both throw at each other. You know, this is mostly just seeing if one of them opens. So they're sort of throwing into each other's defense, but there's a chance that one of them opens up. Now here's an interesting spot. This is difficult at speed to change, but you can see if we go back, right as she steps in, and the camera motion makes it a little tricky to see, but you can see she's actually taking a bit of a lateral step instead of a step right forward into his foot position. He's in a really good position to throw what's called a moulinet at this point. That's what this is reading as. The sword tip is going to go like this as the hand goes down. As she steps out to throw that wrap or that snap, see the arm come out behind the shield. So the edge of the shield is sort of like here. You've got all this arm out, and if you look, he's in a really good position to slash her arm off. Now, again, depending on the region, depending on the fighter, a lot of people don't intentionally aim for arm shots. To me, when I saw this running through the first time, I was like, he's going to hack her in the arm. That doesn't happen. Instead, he throws into her shield. Right, so you can see the blade comes over on this side. I think he's going for the headshot, the kill, instead of for the arm, but it's a vulnerable place to have your arm. I say that because I'm leaving my arm out a lot lately, and anyone who's willing to throw at it is teaching me I need to protect it better. Alright, moving forward again, another thrust as he steps in. Now at this point you can see he's using his elbow or his basket to bobble her shield out of the way. Now that they've wrestled once, they're both getting a little more comfortable getting in wrestling. He's throwing a deep offside, using a lot of sword blocking to protect against it. At this point, he throws the onside leg and strikes her. Now, she's double defended up here and a little blind. How do you know that that's going to be a leg shot? If she drops her shield, her head's open, but she's protecting the leg. You can drop the shield so it's protecting here and hang the sword so it's protecting there. Then you don't get the offense opportunity either, right? So there's just always going to be a trade-off. The decision that she makes is leave the shield up, hoping that it's a headshot, takes it in the leg, but in return, lands a counter leg shot. And again, it's that same wrap we see. Now, if we look at this one, we can see it's a little difficult to tell, but it looks like it's dang near simultaneous. They both step back a little bit and settle down. Again, at this point, they could still be throwing. I think they both want to get out a little bit. And now, again, we see him, Sir Fearghus is shuffling forward. And this time, he's closing with a thrust instead of letting her throw the thrust at him. And you can see how that sort of rocks you back. Even when blocked by the shield, it blinds you and throws you off balance a little bit. He throws the thrust again. So he's basically using it like a step-in jab. Right? So now, if you look, he's much closer, which is the range I think he wants to be fighting at. Now, she throws. Here we see this moulinet. And he throws. He's aiming for her head, but his hand isn't quite high enough to get over the edge of the shield. So that's blocked. Now he stepped in again, and he's using, this is interesting, if we go back just a couple frames, his left-hand sword, he's pinning it against Her Majesty's sword, and then into her shield, right? Now, it's not super duper pinned, because she can lift the sword up and out, but he's basically trapped her down, and now it looks like he's going to get maybe a free shot. Now, it looks like at this point she's rotated the sword around to generate some momentum. There's also the potential for a thrust. Throws another shot in to the body, right? So this is really interesting to me. This is the killing blow. And I see that sword tip after he comes in and pins here. If you watch the motion of Her Majesty's sword in this space, to me it looks like it's going to be, there it looks like it's going to be an offside. Now it looks like it's going to be a snap. Now it looks like it's going to be an offside thrust like the one that killed in the first fight. And instead, she gets it down, and this time under the tip of his sword. Right, so he's blocked this many times before. He's managed to get the point of his left sword down to block the body wrap. This time he doesn't. It might be that her shield is touching it, or he doesn't read it, or all of that sword motion threw him off. But she manages to get the blow. He doesn't even really move that left hand right into the body, and there's the kill. So, pretty long analysis, I admit, of 3 fights. What am I seeing there? Not a whole lot. When I watch myself fight, it looks to me as though I'm way out of balance a lot. I'm doing a lot of leans, a lot of ducks. I'm seeing these 2 fighters look really stable. At no point do they look like they're out of balance. To me, that's really impressive. I think I might go a little bit more. For instance, Her Majesty's fighting style reminds me a lot of a knight up in on tier, who's a bigger dude, but does a lot of really dynamic motion. Maybe it's because he wears yellow too. Maybe it's because he has a similar helmet. But like a lot of ducking and things like that. So I think it's great that there's not a lot of head movement that's throwing her off balance. But it looks to me like there's a couple opportunities to duck, bob, and weave a little bit to get a few more openings. Another thing I'm seeing is that, while that wrap is being really successful, I'm not seeing a lot of offside shots. I'm not seeing a lot of slot shots. Now, offsides and slots aren't necessarily always useful, but I do find against someone who's fighting with a sword and spear or a sword and stabby weapon like this, that slot shot is a big threat because they need to, it's very difficult if I find a spot where he's in his guard. There's this gap in here, you can't really quite see by the camera angle, but there's a slot right in here between the 2 weapons that a shield covers that long vertical defense doesn't cover. And it's pretty easy to turn that inside slot shot to an outside slot shot and hit in that sword arm or anything like that. So I think a few more slot shots on her part. For Sir Fearghus, the couple things that I'm seeing, and I don't fight with this weapon style much, so I'm just imitating what I've seen Sir Hathawolf do. I would be opening that left-hand wrist up a little bit more to get more forward thrusting motion instead of like rotational thrusting motion like we discussed. I would consider maybe fighting with a longer left-hand weapon, although when fighting from your knees, obviously this has been pretty helpful. And he's had very little trouble bringing that tip down to block the leg. But of the, 1, 2, 3, I think the 3 hits that land on him, all 3 are wraps to that side, and then there's 1 thrust. So 3/4 of those blows are getting under or past that bottom point on that sword. Again, it's just 3 fights, a little difficult to generalize from here, but those are the couple things that I'm picking up here. You as a viewer have probably seen lots of different things and could contradict me on a lot of this. So if you have any feedback or comments, please feel free to leave them in the YouTube video or just message me. I'm trying to get a little bit better at this video analysis stuff, but it really helps to get your feedback. Thank you very much to Her Majesty of the West for asking me to review this, and I hope you guys really enjoyed it.